So we are reading Far Journeys by Robert Monroe. We are on chapter 12, page number 157 of the book. And Shivangla, what page number of the PDF?
84 of the
84 of the PDF.
Chapter 12, Hearsay Evidence. Time, indeterminate, night, went through usual unhooked pattern, no signal present. With many options open, decided to return to BB on my own if I could. Ident BBKT 95. Then ran stretch out method. Through the rings without incident, then to edge of thin haze of intermediate area. Went motionless to get percept of BB close in, as he didn't seem evident. Percept brought surprise. He was directly under me, closed and dulled so tightly, no wonder he was hard to find.
So, so you have to understand. So what happens? You see, just by thinking of the ident of BB, you reach BB. And this is something that we have experienced even in the Lifeline program. You just set an intent with clarity of thought, and boom, you will be there. Because when we are going into these expanded states, one thing we need to understand is that we are going into thought responsive universes. So when we are going into a responsive universe, we have to have clarity of thought and mind. So even when we are living in this 3D environment, to a very large extent, even this environment is thought responsive. So we have to be very, very aware of what we are thinking. This is something that is very clearly evident now, that whatever you are thinking, whatever you're saying inside your head tends to get manifested. So we have to be really aware as to what are we thinking. Okay. But in that expanded state, it's like that. It's like tathastu. So to find a person, you just have to think of that person and boom, you'll be near that person. Of course, if it is within your capacity and within your range, everyone has a capacity and range. If that person is beyond your range, then naturally you'll not be able to find that person. Shivangla, you have to unmute. You have to unmute.
I opened and vibrated. Hey BB, I'm back. BB opened slightly, then lighted. Well, I had about given up on you. Had you stuck in your human body? I rolled slightly. Sometimes I am. There was no percept from him regarding AA, and I wasn't going to bring up the subject if he didn't. It was a tender rote at this point, and I knew I didn't have the answer he wanted, if there was one at all. Just to keep the action going, I stretched, did about 3 snap rolls, and returned with a flourish. BB plied. What was that? Just getting some exercise. BB opened. We got a game back in KT 95 where we used that kind of stuff. Want to try it? I lighted, sure. BB rolled slightly. You just try to do what I do. That's all there is to it. He turned, spun off, and I stretched behind him, focused tightly on his ident. It was like holding on to a greased pig on a sheet of ice. Only the ice was 3 dimensional. No, worse than that, it had many dimensions. It was whirling, stopping, starting, moving, slow then fast, passing through strange flashes of percepts into a brilliant sun and out the other side, dodging around clusters of forms who seemed startled at the percept of us. All the time I hung on to BB's ident, much as the last skater in a crack the whip. In and out of clouds, bands of energy that were gusts of hot and cold air, electrical shocks, straight through the walls of a magnificently spired city. I was afraid I couldn't hang on to his ident much longer. Afraid if I let go, I'd be thoroughly lost. He stopped suddenly, and we were back again in the thin haze of outer earth environment. I was shaking. BB vibrated brightly. Good fun, huh? I flickered deeply. Yay, good fun. Who invented that one? BB blanked. Invented? How did it get started? BB replied. Oh, I don't know. Always been around. You can begin a complete new one if you want. The fun of the game is to add to the old something new inside, in the middle, or on the end. Sort of a surprise. Get it? Yay! We humans have something like it called follow the leader. BB lighted. That's right. Follow the leader. You did real well at it. You must play the game a lot. I flickered. Not recently, but I did fly airplanes and that helped. BB blanked and I went on. Incidentally, what happens if you miss a turn or lose the ident? BB rolled strongly. You lose. What happens to the losers? BB flickered. I don't have any rote on that. They never come around to play again. My percept is they get lost. And stay lost? Well, they never come around to play again, as I indicated, so I don't have a rote on it. Often we have as many as 100 playing in a group. Nice game, huh? Yay. I then had one final query. What is all that stuff we went through? We replied. Don't have a rote on that either. Nobody bothers with that junk. It's just a game. Some game. I had a clear percept on my dropping BB's ident. Any place along the track I would have lost and have been lost. I probably would have stayed lost too, I'm sure. But it didn't happen, and I got a strong percept to know the game before you get into it. Certainly, if it was played in KT95. There was the other part, where and when the game took us. What was the effect of such energy as the two of us expended upon the areas we pushed through so indiscriminately and without purpose? How many ants did we destroy because we didn't look or care where we stepped on the golf course fairway? What happened when 100 played the game? The locals would consider such things natural disasters or God's will, whether ants or archetypes. Either way, it's a strange percept, possibly being an instrument, one illustration of ultimate impersonality, perhaps.
So over here they are playing a game, but this in this last paragraph he brings out something very important, is that are we doing something that we are doing with conscious awareness, or we are just doing it for the heck of doing it, right? Are we consciously aware of the effect of what we are doing on various other on the environment, on the other living creatures, etc., etc., right? So that awareness is extremely important. So where are you operating from? What is your intention when you're doing something? That becomes extremely important in these cases. Rather, in all cases, I think in life we have to watch what our intent is.
BB cut in. Hey, you all right? I opened. Yes, sure. You were closed and flickering. Had a percept you were going to skip back to that physical body again. I opened and rolled. No, no, not yet anyway. Why bother with it? Why go back at all? Leave it where it is. I turned inward. The percept had come up more than once, to say the least, and so far I had rejected it. The first question always present was, what would I do or be if I did? There was still a missing element. I knew I could pass through the rings easily, and I might hang around in one of the upper segments and participate. Plenty of interesting action there. Most of it, most, if not all, of it was focused on helping the human process work better. That seems a good and essential part of the training system, but it's still preparation. Preparation for what? That was where the missing element came in. Those last timers in the outer ring were going home, but my percept home had seemed to grow dimmer rather than clearer and cleaner, as it was supposed to. I hadn't visited there in a long, long time.
So,
I opened carefully.
so, so over here, this last paragraph becomes extremely important, right? What it's asking the question that why are we here? What are we doing here? What is the reason that we are in this school? Because this is a school, right? Now, because people don't know what happens to them when they transcend, the fear of death is a very, very big fear. Having said that, when we start doing all these things that he's talking about here, when we are going into these altered states, one thing that definitely happens is that our fear of death starts to get reduced. This is something that is very clear. Also, because when you're going into these outer realms, you're going into these expanded states of consciousness, which is something that we are going to go, what is said by all these people, that we are going into these states of consciousness when we have our ultimate OBE, when we die. Then when we get out for the last time, we have clarity as to what we need to do. So then there is no getting stuck in focus 23 or going round and round in circles doing the same thing. Like those people who've attended the Gateway Voyage, we heard the recording of the Patrick recording, right? That guy was literally stuck in that state for 100 years, and he was thinking that it happened just a minute back. So these factors, which I think is very important, that to prepare ourselves to die. This is there in the Tibetan culture also, where they actually prepared themselves to die. We've had a lot of people like Joe McMonaghan. He said that I wanted to experience the experience of dying. So when he had a heart attack one day, he wanted to experience that experience. And in that process, he relaxed himself so much that he actually recovered, right? So the fact of this matter is that the more aware we become about what is happening around us and what will happen afterwards also, the easier things become for us. So he's very clearly saying that I could have left the body, I could have engaged in the outer rings, but the idea of the outer rings was basically to help the human process and the experiment to work. That's what he's saying very clearly over here.
I opened carefully. Well, it's a I haven't quite finished school, learning yet, and I need a physical body to do it.
So
Vivi had
again,
blanked
he's
completely.
Uh, so again, he's very clearly said over here that I haven't finished school quite yet. So he's treating this earth life existence of his as a school, as a learning place, a place where you learn.
I haven't finished school, learning yet, and I need a physical body to do it. Bibi had blanked completely. It's sort of a game, I went on, and I've agreed to play it. Bibi lighted. Oh, a game. Yay, I can get that one. I'll give you a short road on it if you think you can take it. Bibi rolled. After that last skip with AA, I can handle anything human. I turned inward. He had mentioned AA without flickering, and that was great. He was smoothing. I put together an edited rote, short form of my non physical action since 1958, leaving out the they sections and tossed it to him. He took it in, closed was closed, was still, completely motionless. Then he opened wide, rolled and flickered. I vibrated. It's not that funny. BB finally smoothed. I got an ident I can use for you. Ram the bam. He was off again, flickering and rolling hard. Just ram will do. He finally quieted down. Well, Ram, I get the percept that you were just a locked in, hooked on human until this thing came up. You had some strong action after that. You didn't have much smarts.
Okay. So Robert Monroe's name is Robert A. Monroe. So that's why it became Ram. Okay. And then he says very clearly, I get the percept that you were just a locked in, hooked on human until this thing came up. So that means that Robert Monroe must have been born many times. That means A has been born many times and done this thing, and he's stuck over there till this out of body experience started coming in. And then the magic started to happen.
I plied, I still don't have much. And you sure do things the hard way. I rolled a little. Percept, you can do any better? BB flickered. Why? Any dumb curl with only half his ident could. I cut in. How about with no ident? BB blanked, then vibrated. No, you don't. You're not going to get me in that game. I'm staying the way I am. I rolled and turned inward. I guess from an external perspective, much of my response in my early OOBE states would seem ludicrous. Now I can laugh at much of it myself. At least I know the human school game can work, but there are many unknowns. What do you do after you graduate? Where and how do I practice what I've learned? BB broke in. Say, Ram, I opened, yes. BB flickered. I take it back. You're not really a dumb girl. I rolled. Thanks, I needed that. BB blanked. You did? That's a joke. Human fun. He turned inward, then went on, opening. How did you get a percept and start running this leaving your body game? I flickered. I don't know. It just happened. Other humans do it too. I know at least some do. I've met them. Problem is, most go OOB during sleep and they don't remember it when they wake up back in the physical.
So very clearly he is saying that most people when, and in fact all of us, when we get into delta sleep, we all leave the body. That is the chance that the body gets to heal and repair itself, right? And we have no percept, we have no recall that we are actually going out of the body when we are in deep sleep. So that's what he's saying, that people go into OBE in deep sleep and they don't know about it.
BB turned inward and I knew he was sorting out and scanning the rote I had given him. Things like sleep and wake up needed new percepts on his part. Also, I knew what he was leading up to, but he put it off. He opened, flickering. These three curls that came down the beam, you call it, who were they? I replied, I don't know. They seem to know you. Maybe they were from KT95. BB rolled. That is wild road. Oh, joke fun. But you seem to know them. You wanted them to take you with them. Why? I flickered. I don't know. Ever meet them again? Not that I have percept of. BB turned inward again, then out. What about these curls that helped you when you needed it? Or percepted you did? Who were they? I smoothed. Probably from the upper rings. There's plenty of that going on. Again, most humans don't have any percept on it, except what they call dreams. Wild rote. BB turned inward again, then opened, flickering. Well, I get the percept that there's too much wild road floating around here. I blank. Which in particular? That wrote on human compressed learning, human structure, the one you tossed me. I
Okay.
flickered. Yes?
So So over here, what is he saying is that people are constantly helping us in the learning process. So one of the experiences, I don't remember when this experience took place and where it is written in the books, but he mentions that these three people came and they actually helped him to go out of his body. I think it's there in the first book, right? And also, what is happening is that most of the people do not know that they are being helped because they don't have a percept to it. They don't have an understanding of it. When you really look at it, energy level, energy fields, or these entities, they are always there around us, whether we like it or not. Some are there just to watch, some are there to actively participate, some are there to just really observe and help out if necessary. So you could call them your guides, your masters. In shamanism, you call them your helping spirits, right? And in due course of time, it is even possible to build a relationship with these helping spirits. There is a movie on orbs, and this person, he actually says that in the photographing of the orbs, he had actually been able to start to identify the orbs and even start to name them, right? Because he became familiar with the orbs. We've seen the orbs picture with Andrea and all that. So each of the orbs also have a personality. So like that over here, these helping spirits or even BBAA, even Robert Monroe Ram, if that's the ident that we will know him by, each one of them has a certain personality. That is your nature, your character. Even over there, you carry a small percept with you once you transcend from here.
That wrote on human compressed learning, human structure, the one you tossed me. I flickered. Yes. BB went on. That's not wild. My percept is that it fits. I got another rote, and when I overlay the two, one of them is certainly wild. I blanked. What rote is that? The one we got in the TSI brochure about all the places and things we would be visiting, all about Earth and humans, how it got started, what's it for, all of that stuff. I closed, then opened slowly. They don't match up? Here, get your own percept. BB tossed a rote at me and I took it curiously and unfolded it. Click. Someone, somewhere, or both, in millions or uncountable requires, likes, needs, values, collects, drinks, eats, or uses as a drug, sick, a substance ident, loosh. Electricity, oil, oxygen, gold, wheat, water, land, old coins, uranium. This is a rare substance in somewhere, and those who possess loosh find it vital for whatever it is used for.
So basically, what is this indicating now? That this entire Earth life uh, experiment started for Loosh. Okay, this is what he's saying over here.
Faced with this question of supply and demand, a universal law of somewhere, someone decided to produce it artificially, so to speak, rather than search for it in its natural form. He decided to build a garden and grow loosh. In the natural state, loosh was found to originate from a series of vibrational actions in the carbon oxygen cycle, and the residue was loosh in varying degrees of purity. It occurred only during such action and secondarily during the reactive process. Prospectors from somewhere ranged far and wide in search of loosh sources, and new discoveries were hailed with much enthusiasm and reward. So it was that someone and his garden changed all this. Far off, in a remote area, he set to work on his experiment. First, he created a proper environment for the carbon oxygen cycle where it would flourish. He created a balance with much care so that proper radiation and other nourishment would be in continuous supply. He then tried his first crop, which actually did produce louche, but only in small quantities and of comparatively low grade, not significant enough to take back to the heart of somewhere. The problem was twofold. The life period was too short, and the crop units themselves were too minute. This brought about limits in quality and quantity, as the crop had no time to generate louche in such close tolerances. Moreover, the louche could be harvested only at the moment of termination of the lifespan, not one moment before. His second crop was no better, if as good. He changed the environment to another part of the garden where the density was gaseous rather than liquid, and the higher density chemicals found a solid base and thus were still available. He planted numberless units in many varieties in a new form, with a great increase in size, some many thousands of times larger and more complex than the simple unicellular first crop. He reversed the carbon oxygen cycle, yet all had a basic uniformity. Like the first crop, they would reseed at regular intervals and terminate their lifespans automatically. To avoid the uneven distribution of chemicals and radiation, which had been prevalent in the first crop, he immobilized the second crop. Each was designed to stay principally in its own section of the garden. To this end, each was given firm tendrils which burrowed deep in more dense chemical matter. Attached to this was a stem or trunk which helped elevate the upper portion upward for its share of needed radiation. The upper portion, broad, thin, and somewhat fragile, was designed as a transducer of carbon oxygen compounds to and from the crop unit. As an added thought, brilliant color radiators accompanied by small particle generators were mounted on each unit, usually near the top and symmetrically centered.
So if you see, this is what evolution was all about. Okay, so first the plantic or what do you call it? It's with P that grows in the ocean, right? And then they are just
Plankton,
plankton. It's
plankton.
single cellular structures, right? And then now what he's talking about in this paragraph is trees, basically vegetation.
He set up circulating patterns in the gaseous envelope around the crop, principally to aid in the reseeding process. Later, he discovered that the same turbulent effect served as a means of harvesting the louche. If the turbulence were violent enough, the crop would be blown down, the lifespan terminated, and the louche would discharge. This was especially useful when an immediate louche supply was desired at a particular point rather than at harvest time. Despite all of this, the second crop was most unsatisfactory. While it was true that a much greater quantity was attained, the unrefined louche produced was of such low grade that it was scarcely worth the effort. In addition, the growth period was now too long and no increase in quality resulted. Some vital element was missing. Someone hovered over his garden for a long period in study before he attempted the third crop. It was indeed a challenge. True, he was partially successful. He had grown louche. Yet the product of his efforts fell far short of the wild, uncultivated variety. It was inevitable that he perceived the answer. The third crop was living proof of this truth. The original carbon oxygen cycle must be included. Mobility must be restored. Both factors had shown great promise in high grade louche production. If size could be added to this, much could be accomplished. With this plan in the forefront, someone removed various sample units from the first crop, which was still thriving in the liquid portion of the garden. He modified them to exist and grow in the gaseous area. He adapted them first to take nourishment from the second crop, which he permitted to abound for this very purpose. Thus, it was that the first of the mobiles, the third crop, came into being. The mobiles took nourishment from the second crop, thus ending its lifespan and producing low grade loosh. When each huge mobile terminated its own lifespan, additional loosh was produced. The quantity was massive, but the frequency pattern of the loosh residue still left much to be desired. It was by accident that someone came upon the prime catalyst as regards loosh production. The monstrous and slow moving mobiles had a lifespan far out of proportion to their nourishment input. The growth and life termination process was of such length that soon the mobiles would all but decimate the second crop. The entire garden would be out of balance and there would be no loosh production whatsoever. Both the second and third crop faced extinction.
Maybe over here he is referring to dinosaurs.
As the second crop grew scarce, energy needs of the mobiles became acute. Often two mobiles would seek to ingest the identical second crop unit. This created conflict, which resulted in physical struggle among two or more of the ungainly mobiles. Someone observed these struggles, at first bemused with the problem, then with great interest. As the struggles ensued, mobiles were emanating loosh, not in fractional amounts but in sizable, usable quantities and of a much higher purity.
So, what is the factor over here? It's emotion, right? So, emotional reactions are producing the loosh.
He quickly put the theory to the test. He removed another unit of first crop from the liquid garden area, redesigned it for the gaseous environment, but with one significant change. The new mobile would be somewhat smaller, but would require the ingestion of other mobiles for nourishment. This would solve the problem of overpopulation of mobiles and at the same time would create good quantities of usable loosh during each conflict struggle, plus a bonus in the new class of mobile terminated the lifespan of the other. Someone would be able to transmit to somewhere practical amounts of reasonably pure loosh. Thus, it was the rule of the prime catalyst came into being. Conflict among carbon oxygen cycle units brings forth consisting emanations of loosh. It was as simple as that. Satisfied that he had found the formula, someone prepared the fourth crop. He knew now that the third crop mobiles were too large and too long in lifespan to be ultimately practical. If grown in large numbers, the entire garden would have to be expanded and enlarged. There was not space enough to grow such massive single units and the proportionate leafy second crops to support them. Also, he reasoned correctly that more rapid and increased mobility would expand the conflict factor with the resultant higher loosh output. In one single motion, someone terminated the lifespans of all the lumbering third crop mobiles, going back to the first crop in the liquid area. He modified and expanded them into a multitude of shapes and sizes, gave them complex multicellular structures of high mobility. He designed into them a pattern of balance. There were those that ingested a second crop type of carbon cycle unit, basically immobile, as an energy source. There were others, very highly mobile, who required for energy the ingestion of other mobile modified first crop units. The completed circuit operated quite satisfactorily. The stationary second crop modification in the liquid environment flourished. Small, highly active liquid breathing mobiles took nourishment, ate the second crop modification, larger and or other active mobiles consumed for energy the smaller plant eaters. When any mobile grew too large and slow, it became an easy target for the smaller mobiles, who attacked in voracious numbers. The chemical residue from these ingestive actions settled to the bottom of the liquid medium and so provided new nourishment for the stationaries, modified second crop, completing the circuit. The result was a steady flow of loosh from the lifespan termination of the stationaries, from the intense conflict among the mobiles, to avoid ingestion, and finally from the sudden termination of the lifespans of such mobiles as the inevitable product of such conflicts. Turning to another portion of his garden, the gaseous area with a dense compound base, someone applied the same techniques with even more advanced improvements. He added many varieties of stationary's original second crop to provide sufficient and diverse nourishment for the new mobiles he was to create. As in the other garden area, he made such mobiles into a balance of two species, those who ingested and drew energy from the second crop stationaries, and those who required other mobiles for sustenance. He created them in literally thousands of original types, small, large, yet none so large as the third crop mobiles, and ingeniously gave each some a pertinence for conflict. These took the form of mass, elusive speed, deceptive and or protective coating, and color radiation, wave action and particle perceptors and detectors, and unique higher density protuberances for gouging, grasping, and rending during conflict. All of the latter serve neatly to add to and prolong the conflict periods with the resultant increase in loosh emanation. As a side experiment, someone designed and created one form of mobile that was weak and ineffective by the standards of the other mobiles in the fourth crop. Yet, this experimental mobile had two distinct advantages. It had the ability to ingest and take energy from both the stationaries and other mobiles. Second, someone pulled forth a piece of himself, no other source of such substance being known or available, to act as an intensive ultimate trigger to mobility. Following the rule of attraction, someone knew that such infusion would create in this particular mobile species an unceasing mobility. Always it will seek to satisfy the attraction this tiny mote of himself engendered as it sought reunion with the infinite whole. Thus, the drive for satisfaction of energy requirements through ingestion would not be the only motivating force. More important, the needs and compulsions created by the peace of someone could not be satiated throughout the garden. Thus, the need for mobility would be ever present, and the conflict between this need and that of energy replacement would be constant, possibly a continuous higher order loosh emanator if it survived.
So this is now man. Okay, so he took a piece of himself and he created man.
The fourth crop exceeded all of someone's expectations. It became apparent that a consistent, useful flow of loosh was being produced in the garden. The balance of life operated perfectly, with the conflict factor producing immense amounts of loosh and a steady supplement brought into being by the constant lifespan terminations from all types of mobiles and stationaries. To handle the output, someone set up special collectors to aid in the harvest. He set up channels to convey the raw loosh from his garden to somewhere. No longer did somewhere depend principally upon the wild state as the principal source of loosh. The garden of someone had ended that. With the success of the garden and the production of loosh by cultivated means, others began to design and build their gardens. This was in accordance with the law of supply and demand, vacuum in an unstable condition, as the amounts of loosh from someone's garden only partially met the requirements of somewhere. Collectors on behalf of others actually entered the garden of someone to take advantage of those small emanations of louche overlooked or ignored by the collectors of someone, his work completed, returned to somewhere and occupied himself with other matters. Louche production stayed at a constant level under the supervision of the collectors. The only alterations were ordered by someone himself. Under instruction from someone, the collectors periodically harvested segments of the fourth crop. This was done to ensure adequate chemicals, radiation, and other nourishment for the younger oncoming units. A secondary purpose was to provide occasional extra amounts of louche created by such harvesting. Just give me a minute. To reap such harvest, the collectors generated storms of turbulence and turmoil in both the gaseous envelope and the more solid chemical formations that were the base of the garden itself. Such upheavals had the effect of terminating lifespans of multitudes of the fourth crop as they were crushed under the rolling base formation or smothered under waves from the agitated liquid area of the garden. By peculiarity of design, fourth crop units could not maintain their carbon oxygen cycle surrounded by the liquid medium. The garden pattern of life might have gone on thus throughout eternity had it not been for the perception and inquisitiveness of someone. On occasion, he would study samples of louche from his garden. There was no motive in doing so other than the fact that someone may have held a remote continuing interest in his project. On a particular analysis of a louche sample, someone had casually examined the emanations and was about to return it to the reservoir when he became aware of a difference. It was very slight, but there it was. His interest centered immediately. He looked again. Woven delicately in with more common louche emanations was a slender fragment of purified and distilled louche. This was an impossibility. Purified and distilled louche resulted only after the wild state louche had been processed many times. The louche from the garden of someone required the same treatment before it could be used. Yet here it was, so finely graded in its refined radiations that it could or would not return into compound with the raw substance. Someone reaffirmed his test, and the result still was positive. There was a factor in his garden of which he was unaware. Quickly, someone left somewhere and returned to his garden. Outwardly, all seemed the same. The solid base gaseous areas of the garden were an endless carpet of green reflection from the thriving second crop. The modified first crop in the liquid area was in perfect accord with the action reaction law, the division of cause and effect. Someone perceived without delay that the difference, the source of distilled louche, lay neither with the first nor with the second crop. He found his first momentary touch of distilled louche emanation in one of the units of the fourth crop, which by then had filtered throughout the plantings of the second crop. The flash came during the unusual action of this unit as it entered into a life terminating struggle with another fourth crop unit. This alone would not create distilled louche. Someone knew, and he probed further for the source. It was at that moment he discovered the difference. The fourth crop unit was not struggling in conflict over an ingestible remnant of a weaker fourth crop unit or a tasty frond from a nearby second crop stem, or to avoid termination of life and ingestion by the other conflicting fourth crop unit. It was in conflict to protect and save from life termination three of its own newly generated species huddled under a large second crop unit waiting for the outcome. There was no doubt about it. This was the action that produced the flashes of distilled rouge.
So basically, love, right? That means someone was protecting their young, and that actually produced that highly distilled louche.
With this clue, someone examined the actions of other fourth crop units in the garden. He found similar flashes when other fourth crop units took the same action in defense of their young. Still, there was an inconsistency. The sum of all such flashes of distilled louche emanation from all such actions by the current fourth crop units would not amount to half of the total he had found in the sample from the reservoir. It was obvious that another factor was present. Systematically, he hovered over the garden, extending his perception to all areas. Almost immediately, he found the source. High order distilled louche radiation was originating from one particular section of the garden. Quickly, he hurried to the spot. There it was, an experimental, modified fourth crop unit, one of those that contained a piece of himself in its functional pattern. It was standing alone under the leafy upper portion of a large second crop unit. It was not hungry. It was not in conflict with another fourth crop unit. It was not acting in defense of its young. Then why did it emanate distilled louche in such great quantity? Someone moved closer. His perception entered into the modified fourth crop unit, and then he knew. The unit was lonely. It was this effect that produced distilled louche. As someone drew back, he noted another unusual inconsistency. The modified fourth crop unit suddenly had become aware of his presence. It had collapsed and was jerking in strange convulsions on the solid base formation. Clear liquid was being expelled from the two radiation perceiving orifices. With this, the distilled louche emitted became even more pronounced.
So basically, the was crying, right? Clear
It,
liquid was being expelled from the two radiation perceiving orifices. So that's basically the eyes.
it was from this that someone propounded his now famous DLP formula, which is in effect in the garden at this time. The balance of the story is well known. Someone included the fundamental in his formula. The creation of pure distilled louche is brought forth in type 4M units by action of unfulfillment, but only if such pattern is enacted at a vibratory level above the sensory bounds of the environment. The intensity of said pattern, the greater the output of louche distillate. To put the formula into effect, someone designed subtle changes in his garden, all of them familiar to every historian. The splitting of all crop units into halves to engender loneliness as they sought to reunite, and the encouragement of dominance of the type 4M unit are but two of the most noteworthy innovations.
So he generated man and woman.
As it appears now, the garden is a fascinating spectacle of efficiency. The collectors have long since become masters of the art of the DLP formula. Type 4M units dominate and have spread through the entire garden, with the exception of the deeper portions of the liquid medium. These are the principal producers of louche distillate. From experience, the collectors have evolved an entire technology with complementary tools for the harvesting of louche from the type 4M units. The most common have been named love, friendship, family, greed, hate, pain, guilt, disease, pride, ambition, ownership, possession, sacrifice, and on a larger scale, nations, provincialism, wars, famine, religion, machines, freedom industry, trade, to list a few. Lush production is higher than ever before. Click.
Carry on.
I was closed tightly, turned inward, stunned. My first reaction was there had to be some mistake. This was not the story history of Earth. BB had it mixed up with some other port of call on their cruise schedule. Yet, as I ran the route again, the overlay of what little I knew of Earth's zoological and human history was uncomfortably accurate, albeit from another perspective. The food chain of Earth's ecobiologic system had been well established. Knowing this about Mother Nature, some of the hardcore philosophic speculators had often pondered where the human animal fit in the process. The the downside was obvious. Who ate us? Before it had been just that speculation. Now, BB opened, plied. You get the percept, Ram? I dulled. Yay, I get it. Well then, BB went on. What's loosh got to do with learning? I opened slightly. And you got the road before you came to Earth? BB smoothed. Like I gave you, it was in the TSI cruise brochure. It was in with hundreds of other roads we got before we left. I opened more, but tightly. Where did the brochure come from? Wire, yeah, from the cruise director. Where did he get it? BB flickered. I don't have a rote on that. He just dumped them on us and rolled. Here's the exciting and interesting stops we'll make on the cruise. I got a good percept because it was the last one we'd visit, so it was the last route we got. That's why it's so clear. Some of the others are dim because they were in the middle, not the earth route or humans. It's all clean, not wild at all. I hardened. I hardened. And where did the cruise director come from? BB lighted. Oh, he and the rest are a bunch of girls from the system next to us. Why did they offer the cruise to you in KT-95? BB smooth. Well, it was sort of a trade. We do it all the time with systems near us. What did they get in trade? BB lighted. Games, games. We got more games than any system or skips in any direction. I turned inward and closed. It was getting too hot to handle. If the roach was real, a huge if, I began to drop off. Anger, the feeling of being on the receiving end of a huge deception, the resentment at being manipulated, wanting to strike out at those who were conning me, us, all humans, who were taking something from us without our consent or permission. What happened to the freedom idea? Was every thought and action we took guided, no, directed and controlled just to produce more loosh, whatever that was, for a breakfast table or a fuel tank in somewhere? And what could I do about it, even knowing? I dulled deeply and dropped off more and more. Hey Ram, PV was fading rapidly. Where are you going? Return to the physical was near instantaneous, exactly as if I had pushed the panic button, which I had not done for so long. Strong sense of tiredness, both mental and physical, neglected to check time of return. Low energy, no desire to do anything, unable to get sleep. Got up, went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee, sat and stared at the cup. With no energy or desire for exploration during the 2 weeks following, in a depressed state, the only production that surfaced was it is sunset. The Guernsey has walked many miles around the pasture in her forage for food. The grass had been more lush today here, though she did not bother to consider why. She had come through the gate calmly when he directed her to do so instead of the gate across the road. He knew she would find better grass here, and that was why he moved her here. Though she did not realize it, she only did what he directed. But now, at sunset, it is time again. She must go to his place. There is a goading pain on her underside that tells her this. At his place, up on the hill, it is cool and there is more food, and he will take the pain away. The Guernsey moves up the hill and waits beside his place. Soon the gate will open and she will walk into her position in his place and eat the grass he places before her. While she eats, he will relieve the pain until morning. After that, the man will walk away with white water in a round container. The Guernsey doesn't know where he got the white water nor why he desires it. Not knowing, she doesn't care.
So this is basically the milking of a cow, right? So the same thing is happening. So now this is something, this is food for thought. I don't know whether it is true or not true, but the fact is that he got a rote for this, where basically the production of louche is based on emotions. How when the emotions are high, we all know that we are very agitated and we are releasing a lot of energy, right? So basically, I guess that was the game over here. But now we'll have to see in the next chapter what he really talks about. Anyone, anything to say?